whether it is being raised by a single parent or having just brokenness. And many times we let that control the narrative for the rest of our life. But one thing I love about Jesus and our guest today is that she didn't. Her name is Rebecca Contreras, and it's so good to have you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Jen. So pleased to be with you today.
Yay. Okay, so this is your book. I love it. Lost Girl, From the Hood to the White House to Millionaire Entrepreneur. Now, just that one line says, wow, look at God. And it draws us in. And so I want to share with people today, I think that so many women, Rebecca, are saying, you know, I have all these dreams, but I'm not qualified. And they think that God consults their past to determine their present. And you have completely shattered that theory through your faith in Jesus Christ. So let's start back. Tell our viewers about your childhood, about the brokenness, like up to age 18 or you know, when you found the Lord.
So I don't have, my story's no different than most, half of America. I always tell people we all grew up in some sort of dysfunction.
Yeah.
I was speaking the other day and I said, hey, how many have issues in the room? And all the room raised their hand. We all have issues and dysfunction. So mine were a little deeper than most. I grew up in El Paso. I'm a border town gal. And I had one of 4 children. My mother was a single mom. But Jen, she struggled immensely with mental illness and with drug addiction. And, you know, mental illness alone and drug addiction alone, 2 major issues that people have a hard time overcoming. But coupled together, they were very destructive in our family. Didn't know my father. There are 4 of us in the family. My father was, I was told he was from Yugoslavia. My mom was a Latina, and she was a dancer at a club in Juarez, and my dad owned the club. He was from Yugoslavia here in Avisa. My sister's dad was African American and my brother's dad was Mexican. So we also joke with Mom, you just need the Asian to complete the circle of diversity. But
International tribe.
International tribe, yeah. But you know, growing up in that kind of environment with a mother who struggled, heroin was her drug of choice along with many others. But she spent 10 years addicted to heroin.
Wow.
And at the age of 5, we lived in the projects at that time in El Paso, very, very poor. I always tell people I grew up in spiritual poverty, physical poverty, emotional poverty, just poverty in every sense of the word. And at the age of 5, she told us she was going to the grocery store and never came back and left us by ourselves. Jen, my baby sister, was 6 months old and in the crib at the time. And you know, it wasn't abnormal for Mom to leave and not come back and then come back a few days later. So we kind of just waited around and kind of did our thing as we all were used to. And after 3 days, the neighbor called my grandmother and said, Graciela has left. You need to come get these kids before I call the foster system.
Wow.
So Jen, my grandmother, who is my hero, she's in heaven today, she rescued us and kept us out of the foster system. And you know, going without a mom, living without a mom. We didn't know where she was. We were told she was on the streets in Juarez, but didn't know her place as far as if she was safe or if she was, you know, available to us. We just didn't see her for 2 whole years. And we went 2 years without knowing if she was dead or alive. And as a little girl, I deeply prayed every night for God to bring my mother back. You know, it's amazing. When you're a child and you're in dysfunction, you don't know anything else. That's all you know.
Yeah.
All I wanted was my mother back. I didn't care if she was dysfunctional or a drug addict. I just wanted my mom to come back. And God did a miracle in her life. 2 years later, she returned, and I saw God heal her from a 10-year addiction to heroin, literally overnight. It was a miraculous
Praise
encounter
God.
that she had with God. But unfortunately, she didn't allow God to go deep in her mental state. She didn't seek psychiatric care. She didn't seek therapy for the trauma that she had endured in her own life. And, you know, dysfunction breeds dysfunction, and abused people abuse people.
That's right.
And so although she was saved and she moved us to Austin, when I was almost 10, we moved to Austin. And She was a co-pastoring a little church in East Austin back in the hood. So I grew up from the age of 10 till a teenager, grew up hearing about God. The church that she was a part of was quite dysfunctional. It was one of those old school hell, fire, and brimstone. You know, every Sunday you hear you're going to hell, and there I go to the altar to repent. But I grew up, and I talk about it in detail in my book, Lost Girl, because, and I'm not downing religion. I think religion is an important part of our fabric in our society. But when you base your walk on religion, it can be very detrimental to lack of healing in your own life. And you know, I didn't know relationship with Jesus. I knew religion, and it was a very toxic, you know, religious rules and regulations. And so I grew up in that environment. And although Mom was healed, she still struggled with mental illness. And I'd watch her in the pulpit, very successful minister, and then at home she was a complete mess. Yeah. And so I couldn't reconcile the two. And got involved in drugs at age 13, which was inevitable for me in that path. And, you know, Jen, when we grow up in spiritual poverty, emotional poverty, physical poverty, it's very difficult to believe in a great God. Yeah. And so, you know, I tell the whole story in Lost Girl. The first 3 chapters are dedicated to that. But despite that upbringing and that environment and distinct emotional and spiritual poverty, my mother, one thing she was is a prayer warrior. And I remember hearing her, you know, pray for me in her room. And she always said, you know, I've failed you, but I know God will never fail. Aww. And she admitted her failure, perhaps a little too late. But, you know, went crazy at age 13. And from the age of 13 to the age of 19, when Jesus reached me in the gutter, as I said, he had to dig pretty deep to get me, you know, decided to give my heart to God. And I had dropped out of school at that point and became a teenage mom and started perpetuating the same generational cycles that I grew up in, not really understanding Jesus. But when I heard, the very first message I heard that was about God loving me and God wanting and caring for me, and then I read Jeremiah 29:11, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Jen, when I began to understand that all the things that had happened to me were not God ordained. God never intended. There's just life, you know, it's culture, it's life, it's environmental factors that happen. And, you know, my mother's heart was not to destroy me. She was a sick person, and she never really received the full healing that she needed. And so at age 19, when I gave my heart to God, had a little girl, she was about a year old at the time. And, you know, I looked into her eyes and I just started wanting something different and wanted my own transformation for myself. So we have to own the things for ourselves. It's super easy to blame your past or your mother or your whoever, your boyfriend, your father, whoever's that abuser in your life, right? But for me, I started owning my own decisions and looking for a path forward.